Ted Kaczynski recently failed to live through his 8 consecutive life sentences, and I think that this is a perfect opportunity to make an essay to analyze his manifesto, see what insights are worth keeping, what errors it has, and see how relevant it is in 2023. The manifestos of killers are, generally speaking, senseless rambles that only show how deranged they are. But the thing is that although Ted was a total nutcase, his manifesto brings up some very interesting points about the problems and dissatisfactions of modern society. Ted Kaczynski was a mathematics professor in Berkeley University that suddenly quit his job and moved to an isolated cabin in Montana, where he would write his manifesto and begin a campaign of mail bombs directed at universities and tech companies that had the intention of stopping technological progress. His manifesto, titled The Industrial Society and Its Future, was printed by some major newspapers in 1995, where he makes the case that technological progress is damaging to human development and will lead to a terrible future. After the publication of this manifesto, he was discovered, arrested, and sentenced to life in prison 8 times. This is where the story should end, but interestingly, his writings have become popular on the internet. In recent years, his writings have found thousands of interested readers that it never had during its initial publication. The question is, why? Why are so many Zoomers and millennials attracted to his ideas while also living surrounded by technology? The central concept of his work is the idea of the power process. The power process is the name that he gives to the process that each person experiences when they successfully overcome a problem. First you have a goal, then you exert effort, and finally you attain your goal. Kaczynski writes that it is essential for all humans to experience the power process regularly, and if this is not done, it will lead to psychological issues. This is nothing other than saying that the constant solving of problems is a necessary component to a healthy life. In our day-to-day, it might not seem this way, but there are real consequences to not having any good problems to solve in one's life. Quote, some of the symptoms listed are similar to those shown by caged animals. Common sense understanding of human nature tells one that a lack of goals whose attainment requires effort leads to boredom, and that boredom, long continued, often leads eventually to depression. Failure to attain goals leads to frustration and lowering of self-esteem. End quote. It is the case that in the past many aristocracies have faced this problem. They could not achieve the power process because they had no real problems. Since they were born into wealth and power, they never had to work in order to get the necessities of life, in the same way that a peasant would have to. While this might be very comfortable, it also impedes the power process, and although a medieval peasant lived in poverty, he had the advantage of constantly achieving the power process. His goal was survival, and he had to work the land in order to eat. So every day that the peasant managed to eat, it was a triumph over death, and it meant achieving the power process. For the aristocrat, eating required no effort, and therefore it could not satisfy his power process. Quote, when people do not have to exert themselves to satisfy their physical needs, they often set up artificial goals for themselves. End quote. Kaczynski calls these artificial goals surrogate activities. These activities are not necessary for survival, but instead they are made-up problems created by aristocrats so that they can engage in the power process. Ted gives us a couple of examples. Quote, thus the aristocrats of the Roman Empire had their literary pretensions. Many European aristocrats a few centuries ago invested tremendous time and energy in hunting, though they certainly did not need the meat. End quote. The great difference between the medieval age and our modern times is that during the medieval times, 99% of the population had to work in order to survive, while there was only a small nobility that engaged in surrogate activities. However, Kaczynski states that due to the Industrial Revolution, the people in rich countries do not have to work hard in order to survive, and as a consequence, the majority of the population faces the same problems that the aristocracy once did. Quote, In modern industrial society, only minimal effort is necessary to satisfy one's physical needs. The only requirements are a moderate amount of intelligence and, most of all, simple obedience. If one has these, society takes care of one from cradle to grave. Thus, it is not surprising that modern society is full of surrogate activities. These include scientific work, athletic achievement, humanitarian work, artistic and literary creation, climbing the corporate ladder, the acquisition of money and material goods far beyond the point at which they cease to give any additional physical satisfaction, and social activism when it addresses issues that are not important for the activist personally. End quote. There's a further complication with the power process, and that is the need for autonomy. According to Kaczynski, to have a successful power process, you also need to have the feeling that you control your own actions. The self-esteem that needs to be built through the power process cannot exist if you do not control what you are doing. To be in complete control of your own life becomes more and more difficult as society becomes more complex due to technological progress. Quote, "Our lives depend on decisions made by other people. We have no control over these decisions, and usually we don't even know the people who make them. Our lives depend on whether the safety standards at a nuclear power plant are properly maintained, on how much pesticide is allowed to get into our food, or how much pollution into our air, on how skillful or incompetent our doctor is. Whether we lose or get a job may depend on decisions made by government economists or corporation executives, and so forth." End quote. This means that the individual has less and less power over the things that affect his life. So, in a certain sense, a goat herder from Ethiopia has more autonomy than an office worker living in Berlin. This lack of autonomy interferes with the power process, and the result is that the power process is very rarely met through regular work. This is one of the reasons why I believe that so many people nowadays play video games. It is an activity that gives the individual almost complete autonomy in his actions, while your boss at work will allow you no such thing. The most important question that we have to ask ourselves when reading Kaczynski is it possible to satisfy the power process through surrogate activities? Because there are only two possibilities. One, it is possible to experience the power process through surrogate activities, and therefore it is also possible to live with health and fulfillment in industrialized society. Or two, it is not possible to satisfy the power process through surrogate activities, and technology will doom us to psychological sickness and frustration. I think that it is fairly clear that if Kaczynski did not believe that the latter was the case, he would have not sent any bombs to blow up some computer nerds. If you agree with Kaczynski and say that surrogate activities cannot achieve the power process, then this leaves you with a choice between being psychologically healthy in a primitive society or being psychologically sick in an industrialized one. It is also quite evident that Kaczynski's writings are a reflection of his own life experience. He writes about autonomy because he felt powerless during his time as a professor. And he talks about the power process because it is obvious that he felt deeply disappointed with his own life. I suspect that those are the reasons why he concludes that there is no way to achieve the power process through surrogate activities with the limited autonomy of modern society. Quote, "It seems that, for many people, maybe the majority, these artificial forms of the power process are insufficient. A theme that appears repeatedly in the writings of the social critics of the second half of the 20th century is the sense of purposelessness that afflicts many people in modern society." End quote. If you agree with Kaczynski that it is impossible to fulfill our need for the power process in modern society, you will inevitably reach the same conclusions that he did. Ted's solution to our dissatisfaction with surrogate activities is to leave surrogate activities behind and instead experience the power process through survival in small primitive communities. The problem is that you cannot simply leave industrial society and expect no contact to be established. In Ted's case, he moved to a cabin in the middle of fucking nowhere in Montana, and still technology got to him in the form of deforestation. So, if separation cannot work, then the only alternative is a revolution, and that is exactly what Ted calls for. He states that reform is impossible, because even after reform, it will be too tempting to use some technology and then some more, and finally you will end up where you started. However, here I have to disagree with Kaczynski, because it was exactly this part of his writings where he talks about revolution where he is most detached from reality. His strategy of bringing revolution through bombings did not help him to spread his message. Instead, because of his violence, he was immediately dismissed. However, the greatest flaw in this way of thinking is that even if an anti-technological revolution were to succeed, it would still be very vulnerable to attacks by other technological societies. Even if the whole world were to embrace Ted's ideas, all that it would take is one single nation that embraces technology for production and war to bring it all crashing down. Even if he were correct in all of his assertions, his solution would be doomed to failure. Ted's radicalism is further spurred by his predictions about the future. He thinks that technology will play a larger and larger role in our lives, and as a result, the power process will become harder and harder to achieve. Furthermore, he is convinced that this progress is almost impossible to stop, because the development of technology is the surrogate activity of most scientists, and in reality, they conduct research not for the benefit of humanity, but for their own personal fulfillment. A good modern example is the development of AI. I am personally very skeptical that the advancements in AI will help society as a whole. However, the computer scientists that I have met are so enamored with the possibilities of AI that they are blind to the risks. Hardly any of them seem conflicted at the possible risks and long-term social consequences of their innovation. This is because they innovate not for society, but for their own power process. Consequences be damned. In Kaczynski's opinion, this is the reason why technological progress is both blind and almost unstoppable. Because of this constant change away from nature, he believes that humans will be increasingly miserable. Quote, "It is certain that technology is creating for human beings a new physical and social environment, radically different from the spectrum of environments to which natural selection has adapted the human race physically and psychologically. If man is not adjusted to this new environment by being artificially re-engineered, then he will be adapted to it through a long and painful process of natural selection. The former is far more likely than the latter. It would be better to dump the whole stinking system and take the consequences." End quote. The only way to avoid Kaczynski's radical conclusion is to go back to our central question and answer it differently. If we do believe that it is possible to achieve the power process through surrogate activities, then this would mean that we would not have to go through with an anti-technological revolution. So I think that it is very important that we honestly ask ourselves, can we achieve the power process and be healthy only with surrogate activities? To be honest, I don't know. Most people will tell you that they are content with their surrogate activities, but one should never underestimate how capable humans are to lie to themselves. Even the most miserable people will tell you they are very happy, though everything points to the contrary. If people were not dissatisfied with our current technological society, why the fuck would they read Kaczynski? This fact by itself tells us that there is a great amount of dissatisfaction, and I can also see a part of this in my life. The experience of being a Zoomer and growing up in the 2000s and 2010s is full of technology. For most young people, it would be almost impossible to imagine living without technology. However, Many young people also feel that there is something wrong in their lives, and it would make sense if many of them started blaming this feeling of unease on the technology that surrounds them. I think that that is the reason why so many young people, including myself, are attracted to Kaczynski, while the boomers and Generation X do not feel the same attraction since they were raised with less technology. In my case, this uneasiness with technology comes from the fact that during my teenage years, I was not very happy, and most of my energy was devoted to the surrogate activities that had to do with technology. The surrogate for great adventures was video games, the surrogate for exciting romance was pornography, and the surrogate for having meaningful relationships was social media. If I had to judge surrogate activities based on these, I would agree with Kaczynski's conclusion that surrogate activities will always leave us disappointed and frustrated. However, here I don't agree with Kaczynski. I believe that you cannot put all surrogate activities in one category. I don't think that you can put playing League of Legends in the same category as joining your local volleyball league. Technically, they're both surrogate activities, but the main difference between the two is that one is far more fulfilling than the other, and that is not because one of them is based on survival and the other one is not. Instead, it is because one of them is fake and the other one is real. Video games, pornography, and social media are activities that are profoundly fake, and they are enjoyable insofar as you can forget that you're sitting in front of a screen, while something like joining your local volleyball league is real. The problem with the activities that rely on escapism is that while they might be enjoyable, you will also be conscious that they are fake, and therefore you will not be able to conduct the power process. If I were to spend my time now with video games, I would enjoy my time, but at the end I always feel a sense of disappointment due to not having achieved my power process. This is also the reason why video games were much more fun when we were younger. Our conscience was less developed, and therefore we could achieve the power process. I think that the distinction between the quality of surrogate activities is important. Some surrogate activities are better at achieving the power process than others. And we can conclude that with the right ones, it is possible to feel fulfilled. The great problem then is ease. Surrogate activities that are the worst quality tend to be very easy, while those that do give fulfillment tend to have a lot of difficulty in them. Sitting in front of the TV is very easy, but for example, learning a language is not. If we want to have a society that embraces technology and is not miserable, we have to stay away from the surrogate activities that are both fake and easy. The great tragedy is that these surrogate activities are exactly the ones that are the most popular. Before we reach a conclusion in this essay, I think it would be wrong to ignore something that Kaczynski omitted. Ted Kaczynski bemoans the fact that technology has forced us to seek surrogate activities, but he does not mention that there are also activities that we share with our pre-technological ancestors. The three that come to mind are friendship, romance, and having children. These three are still available to us in the modern world, and they offer great fulfillment if done properly. Having children and a good relationship with your spouse offer thousands of different problems to overcome and experience the power process in a meaningful way. However, I think that he omitted this because he was personally lonely, single, and as a result, he never had children. I think it is undeniable that Kaczynski had a brilliant mind and a great insight into the problems of modern life, but he never found the answer to these problems. The best he could do was to run away and live like a hermit. So, he should be interpreted as someone who can diagnose a disease, but cannot cure it. If there is something that we should take from his writing, is that we modern people find ourselves in a unique situation. We live in a society where most people can easily live like ancient aristocrats, and this means that we are the first society in history where the majority of the population has to find their own fulfillment in life. We are a society that has to find its own way to experience the power process, and this means that we are no longer able to take a fulfilling life for granted. I believe that this is the price that all modern individuals have to pay for the great advantages that modern technology gives us. Our modern civilization has conquered hunger, disease, and scarcity, so in a lot of ways we are closer to paradise than any cultures before us. But even in these good circumstances, we should not forget that humans were not made for paradise. Instead, our bodies and our minds were made for struggle and survival. So why is it so surprising that a life made easy by technology demoralizes us? I believe that the main problem is not the use of technology in the modern world, but instead it is that we do not know ourselves. We do not know what is good for us, and this ignorance will cost us dearly.